Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. This is Irene's DIY Addiction and today I'll show you how to make gorgeous looking Victorian style Easter eggs using egg cartons. I'll start with making the bases. I'm tearing egg cartons into pieces and pouring with hot water. Next, you want to shred the pieces to get paper pulp. Best is to use a blender here. Be sure to add plenty of water when blending to make the work easier for the device. After the pulp is prepared, I'm squeezing it out well to remove the excess water. And finally, I'm adding some white glue to make the clay. There's no exact proportions. I'm using about 2 or 3 teaspoons of glue per 1 egg carton. You just want the clay to keep its shape when you squeeze it or make a ball out of it. Next, you'll need a mold. I'm going to use a transparent plastic egg base. We'll leave the link for a similar one on Amazon. You can actually use any egg-shaped container for making the bases, like a toy car container or anything like this. What I like about this base is that since it is transparent, you can actually see very well where you haven't pressed the clay to the mold thoroughly and where the base still has crevices. This helps to make smooth bases, and what I also like is that the halves are cut lengthwise. It was common for antique Easter eggs to open like this, so I can keep closer to the original. Whatever mold you use, you want to make an even layer of clay. The bigger mold you have, the thicker layer you can make. After that, leave it to dry overnight near a heater radiator. After the base is dry, you can remove it easily from the mold, and next you can decorate the eggs. What I love about this technique is that having just one mold like this, you can make any amount of the egg bases you will need, and it will cost you literally nothing. The only issue is that you'll have to wait overnight till each base dries, but other than that, this is the perfect way to make as many Easter little gifts for your beloved ones as you need. Next, you can paint those bases, you can decoupage them and decorate them the way you like, and I'm going to cover them with fabric and make the antique style Easter eggs, as I told you in the very beginning. I'll use velvet for covering the bases, and I'm cutting a piece of fabric enough to cover the egg half with a small allowance along the edge. You can use pins to hold the fabric in place. And I simply bend the fabric over the edge of the base and glue it into place. I've used super glue here to keep it quick. You can also use a hot glue gun or any glue that works for fabrics. For decorating the first egg, I'm going to make wax flowers. First, I'll melt an old Dollar Tree candle. I'll use a wax warmer to show all the process. You can also melt it on a stove, just be sure to use a water bath then. While the wax is melting, I'll prepare the flower bases. I'm cutting thin floral wire into 3-inch pieces and wrapping one tip of each piece in cotton, as if making a cotton swab. You can wet your fingers a little while doing this. It will help to make very nice and tight cotton buds. Next, you want to cut sepals and leaves out of green fabric or green paper. I've decided to use a die-cutting machine to speed up the process, but actually hand-cutting would have been much easier, since, as it turned out, the cutting knives I have don't work well with fabric. So I've had to recut everything with scissors. Anyway, after you're done with the sepals, you want to glue them onto the cotton buds. And you want to glue a piece of floral wire onto each leaf on the inside. You can also weave green thread onto the bottom of each bud to get the similar result. Meanwhile, the wax has melted and now the fun part begins. You want to pour the cotton buds into the melted wax, and after it hardens a little but is still warm, you may want to shape it with your fingers to get the nice and rounded bud. You can make it drop shaped or make it more rounded if you like, and also you can pour it into wax for several times till you have the layer thick enough and you have the shape you like. As for the leaves, you want to shape a leaf by bending the wire as you like to make it look more natural, and then just pour it into the wax. They look so real after this. After the wax has hardened completely, you can make a bunch of flowers, add the leaves and cut off the excess wire. And you've got a perfect antique-looking buttonhole. You may also want to assemble a longer bunch of flowers like in a wreath by weaving the buds together one by one with a green thread. I don't have enough buds prepared to make a whole wreath here, so I'll leave this bunch as it is, just for decorating. For connecting the two egg halves, I'm going to make a cardboard ring inside one of the parts. I'm gluing a cardboard strip into an egg, leaving about 7 mm above the edge. This strip goes tight into the second half, so it will hold the both halves together very well. For making the egg look nice on the inside too, I'm gluing silk fabric into the eggs and bending the edges to keep it nice and neat. I'm attaching lace trim along the edges. I've decided just to glue it on using contact glue. And finally, I'm tying a silk bow on the little flower bunch and gluing it onto place. I'm in love with these wax flowers. They look so cute, and actually they are so easy to make. You don't need to prepare fabric or cut fancy shapes to make the flowers, and they look so good actually. I think these flowers will look great in any spring decor. Originally these are orange blossom flowers, but I think they look a little like snowdrops as well. The second egg is going to be pink, and I'm covering the egg halves with velvet as before. You can actually use any fabric you like to cover these eggs. If the fabric is stretchy, you can keep it really smooth without any creases along the edge, but here I wanted to keep as close to the original antique items as possible, so I'll be using non-stretchy fabric for all the decor. I've covered the both egg parts like this, and next I'm going to attach pearl beads along the edges. You can use seed beads or reuse a vintage necklace, for example, and you want a string of beads long enough to be able to wrap it around the entire egg. I'm tying the two tips of the thread together, and to hold it into place, I'm sewing the beaded string onto the base. The great thing about these fabric-covered bases actually is that you can embroider or sew on the embellishments onto the base without any problem. You can also glue the beads if you don't feel like sewing. And I'm attaching the beads about 5 mm from the base edges, as I'm going to add more embellishments along the very edge. After the beads are in place, I'm adding gimp French wire or bullion wire. It is used for tambour embroidery and not so common for decorating now, but it was super popular in Victorian times. This is actually a very thin wire coiled into a spring or a spiral. I'll leave you the links for available options on Amazon just to give you the idea of how it looks like. But the listings I found have huge amounts of wire. You don't want that much, and I'm sure you'll be able to find it in smaller quantities in craft stores. I'm using the brass colored wire and I'm sewing it on along the edges first. This variety has a wavy pattern and is rather thick, about 3 mm in diameter. The other way to use this wire is to cut it into small pieces and use as beads. I'm going to use this technique too, so I'm cutting the thinner wire into 5 mm pieces. If you feel like you don't want to use this material, you can replace it with a metallic trim and metallic beads to get the similar look. I'm sewing on the gimp wire pieces to make a fan-shaped element, like a palm leaf, and I'm adding 2 pearl beads in the middle. Actually, I had no exact pattern in my mind. You can just trim the edge and that's it, no embroidery. It will still look great, but my inspo piece had this embroidery, so I've decided to try and recreate something similar. I ended up making 2 branches, each having 4 palm leaves like this. It may sound complicated, but actually this took maybe half an hour to fully finish. Again, you can absolutely use bugle beads instead of gimp wire here. After both halves are finished, I'll add a little paper embellishment in the middle. These are real antique die cuts. I've scanned the packs they're from, so you can print them out and use in your projects. I'll link them down below and they are free as usual. I've decided to make a container egg, so I'm adding a tiny hinge and I'm sewing it on both egg parts to make them open. The simpler option is to sew the 2 parts together in this area. It will also work for opening the egg. What a pretty little container! For making the lock, I'm bending a tiny loop out of wire and attaching it to one side of the egg. And I'm attaching a brass bead to the other side for finishing the lock. The other option is to attach ribbon ties instead of making the lock. To make the insides of the egg look nice too, I'm cutting 2 strips of fabric enough to go along the egg edges and sewing them on. And after that, I'm gathering the fabric in the middle on a thread to make nice lining. You can also glue the fabric on or use paper lining instead to keep it simple. All these variants were used in antique eggs as well. And the last thing to do is to attach a nice bow on top, and we're finally done. I made this egg as a copy of a real antique Easter egg and I'm pretty happy with the result. It may look too complicated, but it is absolutely doable, especially if you use simpler option I've told you about. I'll link all the materials you can use for this project down below. I placed a tiny angel figurine inside this egg and I think it looks gorgeous. The next project is very simple and quick. You want to wrap the egg halves in fabric as before, and I'm using velvet again. And I wanted to add gimp trim, but I had none on hand, so I've decided to just paint the lace I liked brass. I'm using brass acrylic paint. If you use white lace, you may want to cover both sides with paint. And after it has dried, I've attached the lace to the egg halves. I'm sewing it on, but you can absolutely use glue instead. The trim looks great. You can never tell it is just painted lace. I've decided not to make a container out of this egg, so I'm attaching the second half. And then I'm adding the trim to the second part of the egg. To hide the seam, I'm adding a thin ribbon and tying a bow on top. For decorating the center part of the egg, you can add a die cut as on the previous one, and I've decided to make a ribbon embroidery here. I'm using very basic embroidery techniques without any particular pattern, just tiny flowers arranged in a wreath, and I'll leave you the link to videos explaining this embroidery technique. It is very simple, and if you've tried embroidering before, you will find no problems in making it really. And what I like is that you can embroider right on the egg since the fabric is stretched tight on it. Making the eggs like this takes little time, and you don't need fancy materials as for the previous one, but they still look great, and you can make the whole bunch to decorate your home and make adorable Easter gifts. Well, I hope you liked today's project. Please let me know what you think of them down below, which egg which I shown today you loved the most. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you in my next one. Bye!